Hey, welcome to Crossroads. Look, people often say that the Federal Reserve is neither federal nor really a reserve, but there are some things going on right now that could actually mark a significant change in this semi-private organization that, prints our money and sets interest rates. Interest rates affect everything from how much we pay for the mortgages on our homes to credit card debt and any kind of loans, really, including government debt. And this, alongside inflation, often caused by the Federal Reserve printing more money, which they always do, is often framed as a kind of hidden tax on the American people. It's money we pay, it eats away at the value of your money, often without realizing we're even paying it. And what's not as widely known is that this isn't technically being done by a government agency. It comes through the Federal Reserve, which is, again, not actually federal technically, which has some overlap with the government, of course, but that is usually kept at arm's length. But all of this could soon change, at least allegedly. Former President Donald Trump is being accused of plotting a takeover of the Federal Reserve. Wall Street Journal reported that some of his allies have put together a highly secretive 10-page document outlining a new vision for the Federal Reserve. Now, Wall Street Journal had the exclusive on this. Let me show you what they had to say. They said former Trump administration officials and other supporters of the presumptive GOP nominee have in recent months discussed a range of proposals, from incremental policy changes to a long-shot assertion that the president himself should play a role in setting interest rates, meaning, of course, the Federal Reserve. It says a small group of the president's allies, whose work is so secretive that even some prominent former Trump economic aides were not aware of it, has produced a roughly 10-page document outlining a policy vision for the central bank, the Federal Reserve, according to people familiar with the matter. It says the group of Trump allies argues that he, Trump, should be consulted on interest rate decisions, and the draft document recommends subjecting Fed regulations to White House review and more forcefully using the Treasury Department as a check on the central bank. It says the group also contends that Trump, if he returns to the White House, would have the authority to oust Jerome Powell, who he technically appointed, as Fed chair before his 4-year term ends in 2026. It says the people familiar with the matter said, though, Powell would likely remain on the Fed's Board of Governors. Briefly, of course, they mean that Powell is technically out 2026 if Trump gets back in. Now, the article goes on to note that it's not clear whether Trump is actually aware of this effort, but it also notes that it does appear Trump is looking into some influence over the Fed, and, he was before, technically, he was pressuring Powell, and also its interest rates, one way or the other. Now, that could also be something as simple as Trump, for example, appointing a new Fed chair, like removing Powell and appointing somebody else. And the concern they're raising is that he might put somebody in place who might serve this purpose, who would consult with Trump, for example, if they want to change interest rates. And this is actually something important. This ties into one of the fundamental building blocks of modern America, not traditional America, the role of the central bank in our currency. Remember, the Federal Reserve is what prints the money in your pocket. They're called Federal Reserve notes. They're not printed by the Treasury Department. They're from the Federal Reserve, what is technically a private organization that has, again, some agreements with the government to be able to print our money, set interest rates, and, let's say, manage the economy in certain ways where they can, for example, raise interest rates and cause, for example, an eating away of maybe economic benefits, which Trump accused them of doing, or lower interest rates to make bad fiscal policy not hurt as much like they're accused of doing under Obama. Now, remember also, this is important. When Donald Trump was president, and this goes into it, he was accusing the Federal Reserve of blunting the positive effects of his economic policies because they were raising interest rates. Trump was saying, remember, that he would create a 3.5% economic growth. He actually exceeded that. Remember, Obama was like, what magic wand do you have to make that happen? And Trump actually exceeded it. He actually did it. But he accused the Federal Reserve of raising interest rates in such a way that most Americans never felt the benefit of that, even though the economy was technically very good. it did not affect us as much because the Federal Reserve, by rising interest rates, ate away at the benefits we would have otherwise received. At least that was the accusation Trump had. Now, others pointed out that the Fed seemed to have done the opposite for former President Barack Obama. They kept interest rates near zero when Obama was in office, so that the economy felt better than it would have been otherwise. Now, the accusation was that the Federal Reserve was doing this for political reasons. That was what Trump was saying. That's what a lot of opponents to the Federal Reserve was saying. And they were saying that it was trying to make Barack Obama look good when he was in office, on the opposite side of it, meaning, again, that there was some politicization, right? Make Obama look good, make Trump look bad by messing with interest rates. And ironically, the whole argument around politicizing the Federal Reserve is what makes this all controversial, regardless of which side of the issue you're on. The alleged secret plot of Trump's allies to have the White House and Treasury Department play a role in how the Fed sets its interest rates is being accused of a plan to federalize the Fed. And Trump's accusation that the Fed was using interest rates already, doing it politically, was also around concerns the Fed was doing this in the first place. And they believe that maybe that government oversight would fix that. Now, of course, this wouldn't actually violate the law. And this is where it gets a little technical with the Federal Reserve. The whole idea of keeping the federal government out of the decisions at the Federal Reserve is just a so-called unwritten norm. It's just how they do things. It's not technically law. And some have argued the U.S. Department of Treasury maybe should play a stronger role in managing the U.S. dollar and setting interest rates. And again, because these things impact just about all of us, why would you let a private business do it? But there's also concern that if a president or appointed official were to have that level of power, then a wrong move could have a devastating effect on the U.S. dollar and the global economy by extension of that. And there's even a deeper worry, of course, that if an administration, let's say Biden or Trump or Obama or Clinton, right, that if there's an administration coming in and they have the ability to set interest rates, then they may do it in such a way that benefits them during their time in office, but would set things up for short-term gain to make themselves look good, but then leave an economic time bomb for whoever comes in next. These are, of course, the different sides of the debate. Now, again, there are also concerns that this type of political interest is already in place, and this is where the argument currently is. Now, Trump has been accusing Fed Chair Powell, for example, of using interest rates to help the Democrats. In fact, he's saying they're trying to help Biden get reelected using interest rates. In other words, he's accusing the Fed of making its decisions with our money, not based on what's good for the economy, but instead based on a political agenda. Let me show you what Trump had to say in February during an interview with Fox's Sunday Morning Futures.
Jay Powell, the Fed chairman, is talking about a soft landing. Do you believe we will see a soft landing?
Well, I think he's going to do something to probably help the Democrats. I think if he lowers interest rates, but you have the potential of having massive inflation again, because the Middle East could drive up the price of energy. Energy has so much to do with it. And the Middle East, again, the bombs are dropping all over the place, and the ships are starting to get hit and hit hard. If that happens, you're going to have tremendous spikes in the price of oil. And if you do that, you're going to have big inflation. He's not going to be able to do anything. But it looks to me like he's trying to lower interest rates for the sake of maybe getting people elected. I don't know.
So you think he's political? He's just going to cut rates to help Biden, you're saying?
I think he's political.
So this is where things get a little more complicated. Now, critics of the alleged Trump move to bring in some government oversight to the Fed, they'd argue that Trump is setting the stage to politicize monetary policy. And on Trump's side, the argument is the Fed is, again, already doing this, that they're already acting in partisan interests, and that bringing in government oversight would help ensure the Fed is not messing with their money to achieve some kind of political goal. Now, there have been some findings that back the concerns that Trump raised, but I'll be talking about that more after a quick word from our sponsor.
Experts agree. One of the best ways to protect against financial uncertainty is to diversify your portfolio. Learn how physical gold and silver can secure your retirement funds from today's economic challenges. With a gold IRA from American Hartford Gold, you can safeguard your wealth with no penalties or taxes when you transfer your current qualifying retirement accounts. Call now and our precious metals specialists will send you a free information kit, no cost or obligation. American Hartford Gold, a trusted industry leader with an A+ from the Better Business Bureau, has a 5-star rating from thousands of happy clients. Whether you are getting physical precious metals in a gold IRA or delivered to your doorstep, we offer only the highest quality gold and silver. For your peace of mind, we also offer a no-fee buyback commitment, a low-price guarantee, along with free shipping and free insurance. So don't wait. Call the number on your screen today and secure your financial future.
Welcome back. Now we're talking about the Federal Reserve, which is neither federal nor a reserve. Former President Donald Trump is being accused of plotting a takeover of the Fed, according to the Wall Street Journal. Now, critics of the alleged Trump move bring in some, of course, government oversight to the Fed, and they'd argue that Trump is setting the stage to politicize monetary policy. Now, on Trump's side, the argument is that the Fed, again, is already doing this. They're already acting in political interest, and that they're arguing, of course, it's not clear whether Trump is directly involved in this or whether it's just people, of course, trying to write some of the agendas. But they argue that maybe bringing in government oversight would help ensure the Fed is not messing with our money to achieve some kind of partisan agenda. Now, there have been some findings that back the concerns that Trump raised. Last month, for example, O'Keefe Media Group, OMG, they published a secret recording of a principal economist at the Federal Reserve saying that the Fed is, in fact, using its powers to push political and social agendas. Watch.
Yeah. And Trump was president, he wanted to stimulate the economy.
Right.
But he wouldn't do it. And he started raising interest rates, doing the opposite that Trump wanted. So, so the feeling is this, that we don't want Trump to be in government.
Right.
Arel Heasmo, principal economist with the Federal Reserve, says Jerome Powell wants to go down in history as someone who, quote, held the line against Donald Trump, unquote.
He's doing it for the legacy. He wants to be remembered in history as somebody who held the line against like Trump and like somebody who helped the economy.
So he wants to preserve his legacy as someone,
savior.
Even though he's Republican on paper, Democrats still love him.
Yeah, because he's responsive. Under Powell, the Fed has changed to think about equity issues like racial issues, think about wealth inequality as part of the mandate, as part of the things we're following. Think about climate change.
So, at least according to this member of the Federal Reserve Board, when Trump was president, he wanted to stimulate the economy, but Fed Chair Powell wouldn't do it. Now, in fact, Powell did oppose, did the opposite, they say, by raising interest rates, which, as I noted earlier, had the effect of eating away at the benefits that Americans may have felt under Trump's economy otherwise. And usually that policy gets passed off as the Fed trying to keep the economy steady, right? They'll claim that they want the economy and the dollar to be stable. They don't want the values to be going up and down all the time, which would, of course, cause shockwaves in the global market, given that the U.S. dollar is the world reserve currency. Now, debatably, those shockwaves are happening anyway, in fact, due to inflation and some of the current policies, ironically, the Fed, and also just a big government spending at play. But the undercover video changes the narrative quite a bit. Now, there's the allegation the Fed was intentionally messing with interest rates to hold the line against Donald Trump. Now, the Federal Reserve principal economist in that video, he denied his statements afterwards when James O'Keefe questioned him about it. But there's also the other side of this. Now, the claim that Fed Chair Powell wanted to be remembered as having held the line against Trump could also be interpreted as Powell having resisted pressure from Trump to change monetary policy. And that's the other side of the argument, right? Now, you might remember in 2019 when Trump was pushing the Federal Reserve to bring interest rates to zero, which, again, they had it like that under Obama, and there were rumors that he would eventually try to fire Fed Chair Powell. This is what Donald Trump wrote on social media. This is him on Twitter at the time in September of 2019. Donald Trump wrote, quote, "The Federal Reserve should get our interest rates down to zero or less, and we should then start to refinance our debt. Interest cost could be brought way down while at the same time substantially lengthening the term. We have the great currency, power, and balance sheet." He said the USA should always be paying the lowest rate, no inflation. It is only the naivety of Jay Powell and the Federal Reserve that doesn't allow us to do what other countries are already doing. A once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that we are missing because of boneheads, Trump said. Now, look, of course, the context was similar at that time, is kind of similar to what it is right now. Basically, at the time, Trump was also accusing the Fed of acting politically. And critics of Trump were accusing Trump of trying to politically influence the Fed. So both sides kind of accused the other of the same thing. But some of Powell's financial decisions since then are actually coming under scrutiny. Part of this is because of the problems in the economy that we've been facing currently, and also that he's been forced to raise interest rates under Joe Biden by quite a lot, in fact. Now, you might remember him raising interest rates under Trump was blamed by Trump as eating away at the economy, damaging, of course, the economic benefits you may be feeling otherwise, of making houses less affordable, of making cars less affordable, of bankrupting the government, because again, we pay massive amounts of interest on our debt. And should America really be paying interest on our debt in the first place? That was the issue Trump brought up. Maybe we shouldn't. But he said the Fed now under Obama did the opposite. Under Barack Obama, they kept interest rates around zero, which helped the Obama's economy. So, Powell raising interest rates under Biden now to try to stave off serious economic problems has been painted in a very similar light. Now, some even turn the blame on Trump, in fact. They're suggesting that Powell should have raised rates more, but that Trump's pressure kept him from doing that. Although that's a debatable point to make, given that much of the problem came from COVID lockdowns, COVID bailouts, like multi-trillion-dollar bailouts they were doing, and also the aftermath of all of that, not to mention just heavy government spending overall, foreign aid deals like sending hundreds of billions of dollars to different countries, and similar programs since then. Not to mention the problems with the banks where, honestly, people kind of forgot this already, but very recently, several banks had to get bailed out. There were close to runs on the bank that happened recently. This is AP in June of 2022 outlining some of this. They said that inflation has proved higher and far more persistent than he or the Fed staff economists had ever foreseen. They're talking about Powell, of course. And they're saying that at a policy meeting last week, Powell announced an unusual last-minute switch to a bigger interest rate hike than he had previously signaled, and then followed with a news conference that many economists described as muddled and inconsistent. They say that thanks to a once-in-a-century pandemic, the first major European war in decades, Russia-Ukraine, and soaring gas and food prices, caused partly maybe by the fact that they shut down domestic production. That's another issue. That the Fed, they say, has limited power to effect. They say that Powell could become the first Fed chair since Paul Volcker in the early 1980s to grapple with what they call stagflation, which is a word they were using at the time, which has kind of been disappeared. And they call it a miserable combination of slow economic growth and high inflation. There's no way out of it. They said struggling to curb the worst inflation outbreak in 4 decades. Powell last week engineered a 0.75 point increase in the Fed's short-term interest rate, the largest single rate hike in a quarter century. And further, when they state the Fed's hike, raising interest rates, will make it more expensive for many consumers and businesses to borrow, which slows everything down, of course. But they say that yet Powell's explanation was faulted by many Fed watchers, while some complaining that he had failed to articulate a coherent and consistent policy. Biden, ironically, and his administration are kind of blaming the Fed for some of this. And notes further in, the Fed's huge rate hike and Powell's comments renewed concerns among economists about where he has taken the Federal Reserve. Most analysts have sharply criticized Powell, the Powell Fed, for waiting too long, and this is where they get to Trump, for waiting too long to tighten credit when inflation took off last year, and warn that it's now having to raise rates so fast as to risk tipping the economy into recession. Remember, this was 2022. They say that he should have immediately taken action around 2021, which would have been kind of like the mid-era of COVID, the COVID pandemic and so on, right? Now, aside from the fallout of COVID, though, there's also just the reality of government spending and growing national debt overall. And not to mention interest rates on that debt, which we're paying more in interest rates than we are on our military currently. I'll be talking about this, though, only on Epoch TV, our uncensored streaming platform. Before we jump, though, my new documentary, Weapons of Mass Migration, is out this Thursday, not Friday. It's Thursday, May 9th. And now in it, I'm going to expose how, how the open border policies actually work, because this is something that's been left off the table for a lot of us. Now, I'm sure a lot of you have seen the videos, for example, of illegal immigrants being released on buses. They're the big white buses, and you see people with face masks just pouring off of them onto the streets of the United States. We know it's happening. We know that, for example, people are being dropped off on buses at these different migrant shelters. There's videos of them in New York and videos of them in Chicago and videos of them in probably whatever state you're living in. This is something we're watching take place. But if you ask, well, who are the bus companies? Who is running the migrant shelters? Who is facilitating this? How does the system work? You're not going to be given any clear answers on this. And if you turn on the TV and you see these, I'm sure everybody's seen them by now. You see these migrant caravans, this long line of people, shoulder to shoulder, marching down these wide open roads, allegedly heading to the United States. People might wonder, what is actually happening? How are these things starting? Who's facilitating them? Are they getting money? We've heard about it. What is the process? I set out to find the answers to these questions. I went down to Panama, I went into Mexico, I went, of course, to Texas and the border and California and the border. And what I found was that there is a system in place to run this entire operation. And in fact, our own government is part of this agreement. There's an agreement with the United Nations to facilitate these operations. I don't know why the American people are not being told this. I don't know why it's not being announced more clearly. I don't know why people are being kept in the dark about it. And in fact, we're being told the opposite, that they're blaming Texas for busing people. We've been misled, frankly, and we're not having a proper discussion over the real cause of this issue. We're not being told that our own tax dollars are paying for it, which they are. Now, this documentary is extremely important. You'll see it on Thursday, again, 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. That's May 9th, and that's going to be only on epochtv.com. This documentary, I believe, can change our discussion on what's really going on with illegal mass migration. Now, you can find more about the documentary by clicking the link in the description below or in the live chat, and it's going to be groundbreaking. I'm not just exaggerating either. Let me show you the trailer before we jump.
An unrelenting stream of immigration. Non-stop.
According to statistics, around 7.2 million illegal immigrants entered the United States under President Joe Biden alone. They have United Nations facilities here, and the people pushing this are leading people to their death.
To what extent is the United Nations facilitating the border crisis?
They're throwing rocks!
They're being overridden by international powers.
We are not authorized to talk.
It is a humanitarian business now.
And they said, oh yeah, these are the debit cards. We're giving these debit cards to the immigrants.
Why all the cloak and dagger? Why are we being so stealthy about this?
Some of these people have gone on record and publicly talked about this. People close to Barack Obama.
It puts 12 million people on the path to citizenship and eventually voters.
I've been researching, of course, what's happening, but I want to know why it's happening.
We'll see chaos on a global scale until America is extinguished and the power shifts completely to the east.